Russia has made it absolutely clear that there cannot be any talks with Kiev after its attack on Russia's Kursk region. But as Ukraine nurses the ambition to take over more Russian territory, Russian troops took over Viyemka railway station in the Donetsk People's Republic over the past day, along with ARTEMOVO, one of the largest Russian gains of recent weeks. And Russian troops are inching close to Pokrovsk, where Ukraine has asked for people to move out of. Now, in Kursk, during the past day, Ukraine lost more than 330 troops and 27 armored vehicles. Is Kiev losing more on its home turf than it could gain inside Russia as Russian troops continue to advance inside Ukraine and pound Ukrainian troops in Kursk? What is Ukraine's game plan from here? To discuss this further, we're being joined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, who's an international affairs analyst, historian and author, joining us right here on Game Plan. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Doctor, do you feel Ukraine has left its home territory open to Russian advances by directing its men and resources inside Russia?
This is not my opinion. It's a consensus opinion of analysts in the West as well. I was listening this morning to BBC News, their reporter on the ground, who was saying exactly this, that the Ukrainians have taken a gamble and they are risking great losses in Donetsk, some of which are taking place as we talk, by diverting their elite troops to the incursion, now we can call it an invasion, of the Russian Federation in the Kursk Oblast.
Doctor, if we now shift focus to Ukraine's incursion into Kursk, a Russian Su-34 struck Ukrainian manpower and armored military hardware in the borderline Kursk region with glide bombs. Now, I'm quoting from reports which have come in from the Russian side. And during the past day, Ukraine lost more than 330 troops and 27 armored vehicles, including 4 tanks, a combat infantry carrier, 3 armored personnel carriers, 19 armored combat vehicles, 8 automobiles, 2 artillery systems and 3 mortars. These are details which the Russian state media is sharing. Has Ukraine miscalculated the impending larger losses for short-term gains?
Let us look for a moment at these losses of equipment. Not much is being said as to why. Yes, the Russians have very good killer drones. They have very good artillery, but their tasks have probably been made easier by something else that is not in the headlines or even in the 3rd or 4th paragraph down in Western media accounts. That is the question of fuel supply. The Russians 2 or 3 days ago destroyed a large fuel storage area in the neighboring territory of Ukraine that is on the other side of the border. This was a vital supply of fuel to those vehicles now engaged within Kursk territory. In short, you have a situation where Ukrainian tanks, Ukrainian armored personnel carriers run out of fuel. They stall and they are sitting ducks for Russian artillery. That leaves the infantry, the Ukrainian infantry, who were protected by these mechanized units, vulnerable on the ground, on foot, to find safety as best they can. And all of this leads to much heavier casualties on the Ukrainian side.
Doctor, if I were to just compare, there are reports coming in that Russia is constantly gaining ground inside Ukraine. And as far as Kursk is concerned, Ukraine is losing manpower and it is run out of fuel. A very pertinent point that, again, as you mentioned, we've not read in most reports, that fuel is something that they're running out of and only leaving them and their military vehicles as sitting ducks. So in a way, on both fronts, they are losing ground. Now, of course, this is all these developments. You know, there are reports which are coming from the West and there are reports coming from Russia. A lot of reporting has happened from inputs which have come in from the West side. Here are reports which are coming in from Russia's side that suggest that in Kursk, Ukraine is losing out both manpower, troops, as well as military vehicles. Where does Ukraine go from here? What's the game plan? Are they expecting to now be slaughtered there and then as they wait as sitting ducks? Do they plan to go even further? And they are begging the West to allow them to use Storm Shadow missiles deep inside Russian territory. Do you think that is a possibility? What's the game plan from here?
There are various scenarios that we can discuss, but I'd like to focus on the ones with highest probability and also to focus on the question of what kind of war is being fought. It has been ignored in Western media that from the Russian perspective, this is a new war. The incursion into Russian Federation territory has, in the Russian accounting, changed the war directly to a Russian NATO war, because they insist that the incursion was impossible in concept and in implementation without the active participation of NATO officers and of NATO planners in the headquarters of NATO in the United States and Europe. So from the Russian perspective, this is a new war. It is a war now of national liberation, which nobody is talking about. From the Russian perspective, what they were fighting from the start of the special military operation in February 2022 was a war to liberate their brethren, their Russian speakers, first of all in the Donbass, and then what they call Novorossiya, meaning the Kherson and Zaporozhye oblasts of Ukraine. This is a very nice intellectual exercise, which some people can be enthusiastic about, but it's not a national cause. Once the Ukrainians marched into Russia proper, that changed the nature of the war to a war of national liberation by the Russians, a war which can most easily support an upsurge in patriotism, and for that reason alone, I can see why the Russians would not immediately try to quash the Ukrainian invasion. It served the purposes of Moscow for this invasion to proceed a little bit and to get just far enough to get the whole Russian nation very excited and very keen to destroy Ukraine.
And perhaps this gives Russia the kind of mobilization that it was hoping for earlier in the war, because now again it becomes a question of a foreign enemy which has now entered its homeland. And perhaps that is the reason that it's been 2 weeks and Russia has not given a strong response. Of course, there are several possibilities at this point, but you've made several pertinent points. Thank you so much for joining in. That was Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, international affairs analyst, author and historian, joining me on Game Plan. Always a pleasure speaking with you, sir.
Thanks for inviting me.